Hello, good morning. Today I would like to discuss the continuation part of event handling. So, previous class we have discussed event handling mechanism supported by Java. So, what is an event? Event listeners, event sources, and all. So, once again I will repeat. So, the just 5 minutes. So, event handling. So, event handling is a fundamental to Java programming because it is integral to the creation of applets and other types of graphical user interface based programs. So applet is also a web application, or we can create the web applications using Java applets. And other types of GUI means any websites. So any website you can design with the help of Java, Swings, or AWT. They are considered as GUI based programs. So these are all applets and GUI are based on the event handling mechanisms. So applets are event drive programs that use a graphical user interface to interact with the user. So applets are nothing but a Java programs. They are used for only for web purposes. Used only for web purposes. So event drive means we can perform actions on the pages. Means you can click the button, enter the text, move the mouse click action, all those. So graphical user means you can interact with the application. So any program that uses a graphical user interface such as Java application written for Windows is event driven. So any Windows programs we consider as a graphical user interface applications. So in Java, events are supported by a number of packages including java.utility, so java.util, java.awt, abstract window toolkit. AWT means abstract window toolkit, and java.awt.event. So these are some packages. They are supportive for design of a applications, graphical user interface applications. Most events to which your program will respond are generated when the user interacts to the graphical user interface based program. So, for example, mouse events. So, moving the mouse, clicking the mouse, double clicking the mouse, scrolling the mouse, move forward the scroll mouse, move backward the scroll mouse, keyboard. So, entering the characters from the keyboard, pressing the enter button, space, escape. So these are some GUI controls, and some other controls are push button, radio button, checkbox, a scroll bar, moving the scroll bar in the pages. Examples are some events. So here this shows one front end design in the Java or any the front end design. So see here everything is in terms of text. There are text box. So daily progress report number. Here we are entering the value for that progress report number. So date, contact number, contractor, client. So whatever you enter, it receives. So you don't know how it processes in the background. Through front end only we are entering. So this is one example for front end. And this is one example for backend. So here that backend is usually in terms of tables. So whatever enter from the front end, so that is stored in the backend. For example, if you store here enter daily progress report number 20, so that is stored in a table in the backend. There's a date, contract, so contractor number, client job number, everything is stored in the backend. So in Java, so we are using there are two IDEs available. So the Eclipse IDE and NetBeans. In the NetBeans, you can design any web applications. So that NetBeans and Eclipse both provides the graphical user interface controllers means you can create the form, frame, enter the text, buttons, radio button, checkbox, so text area, and you change the background color of the button, and you can include the tables, so combo box, menu bar, drop down list, everything you can include. So here, so it provides some components. So through that components toolbox you can include any uh, web application. So the delegation event model. So here it is the delegation event model which defines standard and consistent mechanisms to generate and process events. So because in the Java applications we are doing many things in the from the front end. We are entering the text, clicking the buttons, moving the mouse, all those. But how they are consistently interact to the backend or application logic or uh, the backend design mechanisms. So its concept is quite simple. A source generates an event and sends it to the one or more listeners. So in the previous class we discussed the sources. The keyboard is a source for events. Mouse is a source, like that. If I press the button is also a source. When I press the button, so it is a source. It generates an event. Push the button, so then it sends to the listeners. So button, so there is a button listener. So in the button listeners, what is the action that we have to mention? In this scheme, the listener simply waits until it receives an event. Once an event is received, the listener processes the event and then returns. If I press the button, it is a source. What is the action that we can include in the listener? Listeners always or simply waits until it receives an event from the source. Once it receives, so it processes the event. So here the advantage of delegation event model is the application logic that processes the events is cleanly separated from the user interface logic that generates those events. Means front end is purely separated from so the user interface logic. So here a user interface element is able to delegate the processing of an event to a separate piece of code. So here we are sending an action for listeners. In the delegation event model, so the listeners must register with a source in order to receive an event notification. So I told if I press the button is a source, then this information delegate to the listener. But you have to register. So button to button listeners. So this here we are discussing. The listeners must register with a source in order to receive an event notification. So this provides an important benefit. Notifications are sent only to listeners that want to receive them. For example, in the front end there are many sources. Button is a source, keyboard is a source, mouse is a source, like that. But which source has to register with the particular listeners? That is our part. Means we have to register particular source with particular listeners, and one source can register to a number of listeners. So that's why, so the listeners must register with a source in order to receive an event notification. So events in the delegation event model, an event is an object that describes a state change in a source. So button is a source. If I click the button, so clicking the button is an action or event. So if I click the button as event, so then what is the action? So that is listener part. So here once I press the button, before pressing one state, after pressing the button another state. So that's why he is changing, describing a state change in a source. Mouse, before moving the mouse, what is the previous state? After moving the mouse, what is the next event? So like that. So there is a different states for different sources. So it can be generated, event can be generated as a consequence of a person interacting to the elements in a graphical user interface. So in the graphical user interface, so this state change happens. So for example, pressing a button, entering a character via keyboard, selecting an item in a list and clicking the mouse, these are all some events. So events may also occur that are not directly caused by interactions with a user interface. So some events may occur with the direct interface with the user, directly interacting by the user. Some events they are occur in the background. For example, so the timer expires. So timer expiring is also an event, but it happens without interaction with the user. A counter exceeds a value, a software or hardware failure, and if the operation is completed. So there are some examples of background events. So and you are free to define events that are appropriate for your application. So event sources. A source is an object that generates an event. So this occurs when the internal state of the object changes in some way. Sources may generate more than one type of event. A source must register listeners in order for the listeners to receive notifications about a specific type of event. For registration, so the syntax is public void add type listener event el. So the type listener and its object. So this is very important. A source button. If I click the button, so class, for that there is a object. That object generates one event. So that object, the button object, goes to the particular listener. Here the particular listener is button type. So here source button and its listener is button type. Add button listener. So you have to register. Source to listener you have to register. For that the syntax is public void add type listener and its object. Here they are mentioning it as el. So this is public void add type listener. Here type. So here type is a general word. So yeah, for any sources you can mention its type. So button type, mouse type, like that. For example, so type is the name of the event and el is the reference to the event listener. So we are passing that source to the event listener object. For example, keyboard. So keyboard event. Source is keyboard. By pressing the button is an event. And we have to register. If I press the key, what is the action? What is the action? You have to register it to the keyboard listener. So that's why the keyboard listener class is the add key listener. So here you generate one object for keyboard and send it to the add key listener. So similar to key listener, there is a mouse motion listener. Mouse is a source. If I if I do some actions on using mouse, moving the mouse, scrolling the mouse, clicking the mouse, double clicking the mouse, if I do that, what is the action? And so what is the action? You have to register it to the add mouse motion listener here, like that. When an event occurs, all registered listeners are notified and receive a copy of the event object. This is known as multicasting. So pressing the mouse button and registering this mouse button to the mouse motion listener. This process is called as multicasting the event. In all cases, notifications are sent only to the listeners that registered to receive them. So before designing, you have to register all sources with their particular respective listeners. A source must also provide a method that allows listeners to unregister. Once everything is over, you can unregister from that listeners. So for unregistering, the syntax is public void remove type listener, event listener. So public void remove type listener. So remove key listener, remove mouse motion listener, like that. Once your operation is over, at the end you can unregister the operations. So that there is a syntax here. For example, to remove the keyboard listener, you would call remove key listener. So in detail, event listeners. A listener is an object that is notified when an event occurs. It has two major requirements. First, it must have been registered with one or more sources to receive notifications about specific types of events. Second, it must implement methods to receive and process these notifications. For example, a listener is an object. So listener is an object. So that is notified when event occurs. It has two major requirements. For example, uh, keyboard. Keyboard is a source. Keyboard listener is an event listener. If I press the key, it is registered to the keyboard listener. So that is the first condition. It must have been registered with one or more sources. You can press any key from the keyboard. For whatever the key if you press, so what is the action that you have to mention in the listeners. So that's why he's telling in the second point, it must implement methods to receive and process these notifications. Once listener receives the notification, what is the action? If I press the K button, what is the action? If I press the backspace, what is the action? If I press the shift F1, what is the action? So that you can mention in the listener. So the methods that receive and process events are defined in a set of interfaces found in the java.aw.event. All listeners are available in terms of interfaces and they are found in java.aw.event. AWT is old version abstract window toolkit. For example, mouse motion listener interface defines two methods to receive notifications when the mouse is dragged or mouse is moved. So in the java.aw.event, so the mouse motion listener. So this is an interface, mouse motion listener. So mouse is dragged, what is the action? How to receive the notification? Or if the mouse is moved, what is the action? That we can mention in the mouse motion listener. Event classes. The classes that represent event are at the core of the Java event handling mechanisms. So for source, source listeners, everything the Java provides the set of standard classes. So these classes represents events and are the Java's event handling mechanisms. They are core of the Java's event handling mechanisms. Thus, discussion of event handling must begin with the event classes. So why? Because in the design app, your web application, everything is in terms of class. If you put a button, if you put a table, so everything is treated as class, and for that class you have to create the object, and that object you need to send to the listeners. So Java defines several types of events. The most widely used events are those defined by the AWT and those defined by swing. So by two ways you can define the events. Old type is AWT and the new advanced type is using swings. AWT means, I am telling repeatedly, abstract window toolkit. So just I told, so all events and their listeners objects sources are in terms of classes. So if they are in the terms of classes, then we have to deal with the objects. At the root of the Java, the event class hierarchy is the event object, which is in java.utilities. For every event, so there is a super class, so that we call it as an event object. Under the event object, we can define all the sources and listeners, and this event object is available in java.util. So java.util. So that is a package, you can include that. And for superclass, for so this event object is superclass and is also having its own constructor, event object source. So for that you have to pass the particular source object, button object, mouse object, keyboard object, like that. Event object source. Here source is the object that generates this event. And for doing some operations using event object, so this event object defines two methods. One is get source and toString. So the get source method returns the source of the event. So using get source function, you can check or you can identify the source of the event, and its general form is, so object get source. So object get source, automatically it gives the object it is sending information or sending notification to this event object. ToString, it returns the string equivalent of the event. So in terms of string messages, so the particular event type is displayed using so this ToString function. So event object is a superclass of all the events. So event object is available in event.utility. Java.utility. Event object is available in java.utility. So AWT event is a superclass of all AWT events that are handled by the delegation event model. And all events are available in the standard package java.aw.event. So that defines many types of events that are generated by various interface elements. Okay, thank you. This much you can study. Tomorrow I will continue. Thank you.